Hey there. Tonight we're doing something a little different, a little grim. We're stepping into the life of a physician in Northern Europe during the Dark Ages. Somewhere around the 7th century, if you're keeping track, which you probably aren't because you're trying to fall asleep. This is not a story about miraculous cures or heroic interventions. This is about standing in a room that smells like infected flesh and rotting herbs, holding a jar of someone's urine up to candlelight and pretending you understand what you're looking at. Before we begin, go ahead and like the video if you enjoy what we do here. Subscribe if you'd like more of this. More historically accurate medical futility narrated with the enthusiasm it deserves. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, all of us united in our appreciation for the finer points of medieval medical incompetence. Now, dim the lights. Get comfortable. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum that drowns out the existential questions. Let's begin. You are a medieval physician, and you know approximately 3 things about medicine, one of which might be true. You wake in darkness to someone pounding on your door, not gentle knocking. Pounding. The kind that says someone is dying or thinks they are, which in your experience amounts to the same thing. It's still completely dark outside. The kind of dark that makes you question whether the sun is coming back or if this is just it now. Eternal night and infected wounds. But no, your body knows. Somewhere deep in your bones, in the part of you that has internalized 50-something years of waking to emergencies, you know it's just before dawn. You lie there for a moment in the darkness, feeling the straw mattress beneath you. Less a bed and more a philosophical suggestion of rest. The timber frame creaks slightly as you shift. The air smells of wood smoke and something medicinal that's seeped into every surface of your home over the decades. Dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. Tinctures fermenting in clay jars. The faint, unmistakable smell of illness that never quite leaves. The pounding continues. Your companion stirs beside you, their breathing changing from the deep rhythm of sleep to the shallow awareness of interrupted rest. They don't speak. They've been through this hundreds of times. They know you'll rise, dress, gather your things, and disappear into the pre-dawn darkness to do whatever it is you do that occasionally helps and frequently doesn't. You sit up slowly. Your back protests. The same complaint it's been making for 20 years now. A dull ache that lives in your lower spine and radiates outward whenever you move too quickly. You're somewhere past 50, which isn't old, but it's old enough that your body has opinions about everything you do. The pounding stops. A voice calls through the door, muffled but urgent. You recognize it. One of the servants from the merchant's house. The wealthy one near the mill. The one with 3 children who've been sick for days. Of course. Because you are having a pleasant moment of unconsciousness, and pleasant moments are not allowed to last. You stand, feeling your spine straighten vertebra by vertebra, each one offering editorial commentary. Your feet find the packed earth floor. It's cool against your skin, almost cold. In winter, this floor would be freezing, but it's late spring now, and the temperature is merely unpleasant rather than hostile. You move through the darkness toward the door, your hands finding the familiar path without thought, past the table where you prepare remedies, past the shelves lined with clay jars and wooden containers, past the bundles of dried plants hanging from the ceiling, some medicinal, some toxic, and you're not always entirely certain which is which. You reach the door and open it. The servant stands there with a torch, his face pale and anxious in the flickering light. Behind him, The settlement is still dark, just a collection of timber frame shapes against a slightly less dark sky. His hands are trembling slightly. The merchant wouldn't send for you at this hour unless something had shifted, unless the fever had spiked, or one of the children had begun convulsing, or some other development had pushed the household past the threshold of manageable worry into genuine panic. You don't ask for details. You already know what you'll find. Children burning with heat, parents desperate for intervention, and you with your lancets and your dubious tinctures, about to perform the same rituals that have failed countless times before. The servant's anxiety is almost palpable, radiating from him like heat from a forge. He's been sent because the situation has deteriorated. He's been sent because the merchant believes you can help. He's been sent because hope is cheaper than accepting the alternative. You nod once, a gesture that requires no words, and commits you to nothing except presence. The servant looks relieved, as if your agreement to come has already solved something. It hasn't. But hope is a powerful anesthetic, and you've learned not to take it away too quickly. You close the door and move back through the darkness. Your companion is sitting up now, already moving toward the hearth in the main room. You hear the soft sounds of them uncovering the embers, feeding them kindling, coaxing the fire back to life. Light blooms gradually, warm and orange, pushing back the darkness. You dress in the clothes you wear for house calls, a long woolen tunic, dark enough not to show stains, and a leather belt from which you hang a small pouch of coins and a knife that's more tool than weapon. Over this, a heavier robe that marks you as someone educated, someone who owns books and can read Latin, even if your Latin is mostly memorized phrases you don't fully understand. Your companion appears with a cup of weak ale and a piece of bread. You drink and eat standing up, mechanically, not tasting anything. Your mind is already moving through what you'll need to bring. You move to the back room, your apothecary, your workshop, your laboratory of confident guesswork. The smell here is overwhelming. Bundles of dried plants hang from every available beam. Shelves line the walls, crowded with containers. Clay jars sealed with wax. Wooden boxes with sliding lids. Leather pouches tied with cord. Glass vials, rare and expensive, containing liquids of various colors and dubious origins. You begin gathering supplies, your hands moving with practiced efficiency. First, your leather satchel. It's old, stained, and smells faintly of everything you've ever carried in it. Blood, herbs, vinegar, despair. You pack linen bandages, clean ones, or at least ones that have been boiled and dried. Cleanliness doesn't cure anything, but it makes you look competent. Lancets for bloodletting. Small, sharp blades kept in a wooden case. You check their edges by touch, still sharp enough to open a vein without too much sawing. A ceramic bowl for collecting blood. You've learned to bring your own. Patients rarely have suitable containers, and you're tired of improvising with cooking pots. Various powders and tinctures in small containers. Feverfew for fever, though you're not convinced it does anything. Willow bark, which sometimes seems to help with pain, or maybe people just say it helps because they've paid for it. Something labelled cure-all, that you purchased from a travelling merchant 3 years ago and have been using sparingly because you have no idea what's in it. A jar of leeches. They're kept in water, fed occasionally on your own blood when you remember. They wriggle when you lift the jar, sensing movement. You've named them, which is probably a sign of something concerning, but you've stopped examining your own mental state too closely. A small vial of holy water, blessed by Father Cuthbert. You're not sure if it does anything, but patients expect it. and expectation is half of medicine. The other half is luck, and you can't bottle that. Your companion appears in the doorway, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Food for later: bread, cheese, perhaps some dried meat. You take it and add it to your satchel. Your companion watches you pack with the practiced silence of someone who has seen this ritual countless times before. They know where you're going. The merchant's house, the fevered children, the same desperate hope that greets you at every door. Their eyes follow your movements, tracking the satchel, the vial of holy water, the jar of leeches. There's no need to speak. The understanding between you is complete and exhausted. As you move toward the door, your companion reaches out and briefly touches your shoulder. Not quite a grip, more a acknowledgement. Their face is lined with the same resignation you feel. The knowledge that you'll go through the motions, that some children will survive and some won't, and your presence will be credited or blamed accordingly. They release you without words. Words would only complicate what is already understood. You sling the satchel over your shoulder. It's heavy with the weight of remedies you don't understand and tools you barely know how to use. You step outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The air is cool and damp, carrying the smell of wood smoke from banked fires, and something organic and earthy. The smell of a settlement built on mud and hope. The sky above is still mostly black, but there's a band of deep blue along the eastern horizon now. The first suggestion that dawn is preparing its entrance. The servant leads the way with his torch, and you follow, your satchel heavy against your side, your mind already rehearsing what you'll say when you arrive. The children have a fever. You'll examine them with great seriousness, checking their pulses, inspecting their throats, feeling for swellings. You'll pronounce their humors imbalanced. Too much heat, probably, or an excess of yellow bile. You'll recommend bloodletting to release the corrupted humors. You'll apply poultices of herbs that smell impressive. You'll prescribe prayers alongside your remedies, because God and medicine work better together. Or at least that's what you tell people. And then you'll wait. Either the children will improve, in which case you'll be praised as a miracle worker and paid handsomely, or they'll worsen, in which case you'll explain that the corruption had spread too far, that you did everything possible, that sometimes God's will cannot be altered by earthly intervention. Either way, you'll have done your job, which is not, despite what people think, to cure illness. Your job is to look like you could cure illness if the circumstances were slightly different. The settlement is still mostly asleep as you walk. A few early risers are visible. A woman drawing water from a well. A man tending to animals in a small pen. They nod as you pass. Everyone knows who you are. The physician. The one who shows up when things are bad and occasionally makes them slightly less bad. The path is hard-packed earth, worn smooth by countless feet. In spring it can be muddy, but the recent days have been dry and the surface is firm. Your footsteps make soft sounds, almost inaudible beneath the crackle of the servant's torch. You pass the church. A stone building, one of the few permanent structures in the settlement. Father Cuthbert will be inside soon, preparing for morning prayers. You'll probably see him later today. You often work together, him providing spiritual intervention while you provide physical intervention, both of you secretly uncertain which is more effective. The merchant's house comes into view. It's larger than most. Timber framed with a thatched roof, 2 stories, with actual glass in some of the windows. Wealth doesn't protect you from illness, but it does mean you can afford to summon a physician at dawn and pay him enough that he pretends to know what he's doing. The servant leads you to the door and knocks, It opens immediately. They've been waiting. Inside, the house smells of beeswax candles and fear. The merchant himself appears, a man in his 40s with a face that's aged 10 years in the past week. His wife hovers behind him, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. The merchant's face is tight with controlled panic. His hands move uselessly, gesturing toward the stairs, then dropping to his sides. His mouth opens as if to speak, then closes. The desperation is written across every line of his face. The plea for help, the terror of losing his children, the helpless rage at his own powerlessness, despite his wealth. You nod with what you hope is reassuring confidence, the performance beginning already. He leads you up a narrow wooden staircase to the upper floor. The smell of illness grows stronger sweat, something sour, the particular odor of bodies fighting infection. You've smelled it 1,000 times. It never becomes pleasant. The children are in a single room, 3 beds arranged against the walls, 2 boys and a girl, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 12. All 3 are lying still, their faces flushed, their breathing rapid and shallow. Candles provide minimal light. You set down your satchel and move to the nearest child, the eldest boy. His skin is hot to the touch. Fever, obviously. His pulse is rapid, thready. You pull back his eyelids. The whites are slightly yellowed. You press your fingers against his neck, feeling for swellings. There are some small lumps beneath the jaw. You move to the next child, then the third, all showing similar symptoms: high fever, rapid pulse, swollen lymph nodes. That particular quality of illness that suggests something systemic, something beyond a simple cold or digestive upset. The merchant and his wife watch from the doorway, their faces desperate for answers. The wife's hands are clasped so tightly her knuckles have gone white. She's trembling slightly, her whole body rigid with the effort of not collapsing. You straighten slowly, buying time while your mind sorts through possibilities. Plague? Possibly, though you've seen plague and this doesn't quite match. Some kind of fever that's been moving through the settlement. Perhaps. An imbalance of humours triggered by bad air or corrupted food. That's always a safe diagnosis. You turn to face them, arranging your expression into something that suggests professional assessment rather than complete uncertainty. Their humours are severely imbalanced, you think, preparing the explanation in your mind. The fever indicates an excess of yellow bile, possibly complicated by corrupted blood. The swellings suggest the body is attempting to expel the corruption, but cannot do so efficiently. The merchant nods as if he's heard your thoughts, as if the very act of your examination has communicated the diagnosis. It hasn't really, but your confident movements and thoughtful pauses have done their work. The wife's eyes are pleading. Her lips move silently. Perhaps a prayer. Perhaps just the shape of her children's names. You turn back to your satchel and begin the performance. First, you must release some of the corrupted blood to relieve the pressure on their humours. Then you'll apply poultices to draw out the fever. You have remedies that will help balance their internal heat. You're not sure any of this will work. You're not even sure it makes sense. But it's what you were taught, and it's what people expect. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, people recover after you do these things, and everyone agrees you've saved them. You take out your lancets and the ceramic bowl, the eldest boy first. You tie a cloth around his upper arm to make the veins swell. The merchant looks away. His wife makes a small sound of distress but doesn't leave. You make the cut quickly, cleanly. blood flows into the bowl dark red, almost purple. You let it flow for perhaps a minute, collecting maybe half a cup. Then press a clean cloth against the wound and bind it. The boy barely reacts. He's too deep in fever to notice much. You repeat the process with the other two children. The blood looks the same. Dark, thick, unremarkable. You examine it as if you can read something in its color or consistency. You can't. Blood is blood, but you nod thoughtfully, as if confirming your diagnosis. The corruption is significant, you think, allowing the thought to show on your face. But you've released some of the pressure. Their bodies can now focus on expelling the remaining imbalance. You prepare poultices, a mixture of crushed herbs, vinegar, and something that might be mustard powder. You spread this on cloth and apply it to each child's chest and forehead. The smell is sharp and medicinal. It probably does nothing, but it looks and smells like medicine, which is important. From your satchel, you take small vials of tincture, feverfew mixed with wine, or possibly just wine with some herbs floating in it. You're honestly not certain anymore. You measure out doses and help each child drink. They grimace at the taste. Good. Medicine should taste unpleasant. People trust it more that way. Finally, you take out the vial of holy water and make the sign of the cross over each child, murmuring a prayer in Latin. The merchant and his wife bow their heads. When you finish, you turn to face them. You gesture to the poultices, then to the vials you're leaving behind. Your hands mime the process of changing the dressings, of administering the remedies. The merchant watches intently, nodding to show he understands. His wife's face is wet with tears, but she's also nodding, committing your instructions to memory. You point to the children, then upward, toward heaven. The meaning is clear. You've done what can be done. The bloodletting will help rebalance their humors. The poultices will draw out the fever. The remedies will support their body's natural healing. And you've asked for God's intervention, which is ultimately the most powerful medicine. The merchant nods, looking slightly less panicked. His wife is crying quietly, but there's something in her expression that might be hope, or at least the desperate desire to believe in hope. The wife's eyes ask the question her mouth cannot. Will they recover? This is always the difficult question. The honest answer is, I have no idea. They might. They might not. Nothing I've done will significantly affect the outcome. But honesty is not what people pay for. You gesture to the children, their youth, their strength visible even in illness. You place a hand over your heart, then gesture upward again. They're young and strong. Their bodies are fighting. With God's grace and continued treatment, there's reason for hope. It's not a promise. It's not even really an answer. But it's something. And something is better than nothing when you're desperate. You hold up your hands, fingers spread, then point to the setting sun visible through the window, then to yourself. You'll return this evening to check on them. You mime drinking water, changing poultices. Keep them cool. Give them water if they'll drink. Change the poultices every few hours. And pray. The merchant reaches for his purse. You stop him with a raised hand, shaking your head firmly. Payment can wait until they're recovered. It's a calculated risk. If they die, you might not get paid at all. But it makes you look confident in your treatment, and confidence is part of the performance. The merchant's face floods with gratitude. His wife manages a weak smile through her tears. You gather your things, leaving behind some extra herbs and bandages. The servant leads you back downstairs and out into the growing dawn. The sky is lighter now. The deep blue has spread upward, pushing back the black. The first birds are beginning to call, tentative at first, then more confident. You walk back through the settlement alone, the servant having stayed behind. Your satchel is lighter now, emptied of some of its contents. Your mind is already moving ahead to the rest of the day. The children will either recover, or they won't. You've done what you can, which is to say you've performed the rituals that society expects of a physician. Whether those rituals have any actual effect is a question you stopped asking years ago. Because the truth you can never say aloud is that you don't really know what causes illness or how to cure it. You have theories, inherited from ancient texts, and passed down through generations of physicians who were probably just as confused as you are. You have remedies that sometimes seem to work and sometimes don't. You have prayers and hope, and the occasional lucky coincidence. But mostly what you have is the appearance of knowledge. And in a world where most people die from things no one understands, appearance is enough. You arrive home as dawn completes its arrival. The sky is pale blue now, streaked with pink and orange along the eastern horizon. Smoke rises from chimneys throughout the settlement. The world is waking up. Your companion has prepared breakfast: bread, cheese, weak ale. You sit at the rough wooden table and eat slowly, not tasting much. Your mind is elsewhere. Aldwin, your apprentice, appears from the back room where he sleeps. He's 14, gangly, with the kind of earnest enthusiasm that you're trying to beat out of him before reality does it for you. He sees you and his face shifts, a question forming behind his eyes. He opens his mouth, closes it, then tries again. His hands are already moving, gesturing toward the door you've just come through, toward the merchant's house beyond. He wants to know about the children. He wants to know what you found, what you did, whether your interventions mattered. You don't answer. You tear off a piece of bread and chew it deliberately, your eyes fixed on the table. The silence stretches. Aldwin's shoulders tense slightly. He's learned enough to know that silence from you usually means something complicated, something you won't explain directly. He sits across from you and watches your face with the intensity of someone trying to read a text written in a language he doesn't quite understand. His fingers drum once against the table, a nervous habit, then stop. He's waiting for you to volunteer information. He's hoping you'll explain what you observed, what you concluded, what the bloodletting accomplished. You don't. You eat your bread. You drink your weak ale. You can feel his frustration building, the weight of his unasked questions pressing against the space between you. Finally, he stands and moves toward the back room, his movements slower than usual. He pauses at the threshold, glancing back at you with an expression caught between hope and resignation. You nod once, a gesture that means nothing and everything. He disappears into the apothecary. You finish your breakfast alone, grateful for the reprieve. The morning passes in the familiar rhythm of your profession. You and Aldwin work in the apothecary, processing herbs. This is where you manufacture certainty in the form of powders and tinctures, an herb for fever, an herb for wounds, an herb for madness. You're never entirely certain which herbs you're using, or whether you're using them correctly, but the ritual is important. Aldwin grinds dried leaves in a mortar with careful, deliberate motions. His brow is furrowed in concentration, but you can see the questions forming behind his eyes. He pauses occasionally, pestle suspended, as if about to speak. Each time, he seems to reconsider and returns to his work. The grinding resumes. Scrape, scrape, scrape. a rhythm that fills the silence between you. You watch him work and recognize the expression. It's the same one you wore 30 years ago when you were learning this trade. The same hunger to understand the logic beneath the practice. The same belief that there must be a system, a reason, a method that explains why you do what you do. You stopped asking those questions long ago. Somewhere between your 10th patient and your 1000th, the need for answers faded. You learned to accept that you don't fully understand the mechanisms. You learned to perform the rituals without examining them too closely. You learned that certainty, even false certainty, is more valuable than honest doubt. Aldwin doesn't know this yet. He still believes there's a coherent system underlying your work. He still thinks that if he watches carefully enough, asks the right questions, he'll eventually understand the logic of bloodletting and humoral balance, and why some patients recover while others die. You could tell him the truth. You could explain that you're largely guessing, that the ancient texts contradict each other, that you've been doing this for 3 decades, and you're no more certain now than you were when you started. You could tell him that the only real skill you've developed is the ability to look confident while being fundamentally uncertain about almost everything. But that would be cruel. Let him have his questions a while longer. Let him believe there's a system to master. Reality will teach him the rest soon enough. You return to your own work, measuring out feverfew into a clay container. The herb is dried, fragrant, probably useful for something. You label it carefully in your fading script and set it on the shelf with the others. You work in silence for a while. The only sounds the scrape of pestle against mortar, the rustle of dried plants, the occasional creak of the timber frame settling. The apothecary is your domain. Bundles of herbs hang from every beam. Some you gathered yourself from the forest, some you purchased at market, some you inherited from the physician who trained you. Yarrow for wounds, feverfew for headaches, wormwood for digestion, mandrake for pain, though you use it sparingly because it's expensive and possibly poisonous. Shelves line the walls, crowded with containers, each one labelled in your careful script, though some of the labels have faded and you're no longer certain what's inside. You should probably organize better. You should probably throw out the ones you can't identify. But there's always the chance that one of them contains something useful, and you can't afford to waste anything. Your companion appears in the doorway, their expression already communicating what you need to know. Godfrey's servant has come. Godfrey is worse, or thinks he is, or simply needs the ritual of your presence to feel like something is being done. You don't need to ask for details. The pattern is established and unchanging. You nod once, a gesture that requires no explanation. Your companion understands. They disappear back into the main room to send word that you'll visit this afternoon. Aldwin looks up from his work, his eyes tracking the exchange. There's a question forming behind his expression. You can see it in the slight furrow of his brow, the way his hands pause mid-motion. He wants to understand the logic of it. Why Godfrey again? Why so frequently? Will the visits eventually result in recovery? You don't answer because the answers are complicated and depressing. Godfrey the miller is perhaps 60 years old, which is ancient by any standard. His cough suggests something chronic in the lungs, possibly consumption, possibly just the accumulated damage of breathing flower dust for 40 years. He's not going to recover. He's going to continue declining slowly until one day he doesn't wake up. But you'll visit him twice a week anyway. You'll examine him with practiced efficiency. You'll prescribe the same remedies. You'll collect the same payment. and he'll feel, for a brief moment, like something is being done, like someone is trying, like his decline is being managed, rather than simply witnessed. Is that enough? The question hangs in the air between you and Aldwin, unspoken but present. Is comfort enough when you can't provide cure? Is it enough to show up, to perform rituals, to offer hope even when you know it's false? You return to your work, measuring out more feverfew. The answer, you've learned, is that it has to be, because the alternative, admitting that most of what you do is theatre, that you're largely helpless, that people die regardless of your interventions, is unbearable. So you perform the theatre, you show up, you do the rituals, you collect payment for comfort disguised as medicine. Aldwin will learn this eventually. For now, let him believe there's a system to master. Mid-morning brings more work. You prepare remedies for patients who will come by later to collect them. A woman with joint pain. You give her a salve made from something that might be comfrey. A man with digestive troubles. You give him a powder to mix with wine, made from herbs you're reasonably confident won't kill him. A child with a persistent cough. You give the mother a syrup made from honey and herbs, which probably won't help, but at least tastes pleasant. Each remedy is prepared with care, measured precisely, packaged in small containers. You write instructions on scraps of parchment, how much to take, how often, what prayers to say while taking it. The instructions are probably more important than the remedies themselves. They give people something to do, a sense of control over their illness. And control, even illusory control, is powerful medicine. By midday, you're ready to venture out. The settlement is fully awake now. People move through the narrow streets, women carrying water, men heading to work, children playing in the mud, dogs bark, chickens scatter. The air smells of wood smoke, cooking food, animals, and human waste. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar. You walk toward the market, Aldwin following behind carrying a basket for purchases. The market is a chaotic sprawl of temporary stalls and permanent shops. Merchants sell everything: food, cloth, tools, animals. And scattered among them, the healers. There's the bone setter, a large man with hands like mallets, who specializes in setting broken bones and dislocated joints. He's actually quite good at it, better than you are. You refer patients to him when appropriate. There's the wise woman, old and weathered, who sells charms and potions and whispered cures. Half of what she does is superstition, but the other half is genuine herbal knowledge passed down through generations. You respect her, even if you'd never admit it publicly. There's the traveling merchant who sells miracle cures, bottles of liquid that supposedly cure everything from baldness to plague. He's a charlatan, obviously, but he's a successful charlatan. People buy his remedies because they're exotic and expensive, which makes them seem more powerful than your local herbs. You move between the stalls, looking for specific plants. Wormwood, you're running low. Feverfew, always useful. Something called cure-all, that you're not sure exists, but which a merchant swears will solve all your problems. You haggle over prices, examine the quality of dried herbs, reject anything that looks mouldy or suspicious. Aldwin watches, learning the art of purchasing medicine, which is really the art of educated guessing. Aldwin follows close behind, his eyes tracking your movements. You pick up a bundle of something that might be yarrow, bring it to your nose, and inhale deeply. The scent is faint, dusty, old. You set it down without comment and move to the next stall. Your hands know what to look for: the slight brittleness of age, the faint smell of decay, the almost imperceptible discoloration that suggests mold has begun its work. At another stall, you find fresher stock. You examine a bundle of wormwood, crushing a small leaf between your fingers and smelling it. The scent is sharp, alive. You nod once and set it aside for purchase. Aldwin watches your fingers, the way you touch the herbs with a kind of casual certainty, the way your nose guides your decisions more than your eyes. You move to another stall. The merchant here is more reputable. An older woman who grows her own herbs in a garden outside the settlement. Her products are usually fresh and properly dried. You examine her feverfew carefully, checking the undersides of the dried leaves for any sign of insect damage. Finding none, you add it to your growing pile. You purchase wormwood, feverfew, and something she calls moon herb that supposedly helps with women's ailments. You're not sure what it actually does, but women seem to appreciate having a specific remedy for their specific problems, so you stock it. As you're paying, you notice another physician across the market. He's younger than you, perhaps 40, dressed in finer robes. He's surrounded by patients, all of them listening intently as he explains something with grand gestures. You feel a familiar mixture of contempt and envy. Contempt, because he's clearly performing, making promises he can't keep, selling hope to desperate people. Envy, because he's better at it than you are, more charismatic, more confident in his lies. Aldwin's eyes move between you and the other physician, trying to understand the difference. Your hands continue their work, selecting, examining, rejecting, while the other man gestures and speaks, two different approaches to the same impossible profession. You watch the man for a moment. He's holding up a vial of something, explaining its miraculous properties. The crowd nods, impressed. You move on to another stall. The merchant here is more reputable. An older woman who grows her own herbs in a garden outside the settlement. Her products are usually fresh and properly dried. You purchase wormwood, feverfew, and something she calls moon herb that supposedly helps with women's ailments. You're not sure what it actually does, but women seem to appreciate having a specific remedy for their specific problems, so you stock it. As you're paying, you notice another physician across the market. He's younger than you, perhaps 40, dressed in finer robes. He's surrounded by patients, all of them listening intently as he explains something with grand gestures. You feel a familiar mixture of contempt and envy. Contempt, because he's clearly performing, making promises he can't keep, selling hope to desperate people. Envy, because he's better at it than you are, more charismatic, more confident in his lies. Who's that? Aldwin asks, following your gaze. Competition, you say. Is he a good physician? You watch the man for a moment. He's holding up a vial of something, explaining its miraculous properties. The crowd nods, impressed. He's a good performer, you say. Whether he's a good physician is irrelevant. Because that's the truth of your profession. The best physicians aren't necessarily the ones who cure the most people. They're the ones who convince people they can cure them. Confidence matters more than competence. Appearance matters more than reality. You finish your purchases and head toward Godfrey's mill. The mill sits beside a stream, the large wooden wheel turning slowly in the current. The sound of it is constant, a rhythmic creaking and splashing that provides background noise to everything. Godfrey's house is attached to the mill, a comfortable structure that speaks of moderate wealth. You've been here so many times you could navigate it, blindfolded. A servant lets you in. Godfrey is in his usual place, A curtained bed in a room on the upper floor. He's propped up on pillows, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth of the day. He looks the same as he did 3 days ago when you last visited. Pale, thin, his breathing slightly laboured. The cough is there, always there. A wet rattling sound that suggests fluid in the lungs. "Physician," he says, his voice weak but pleased. "I was hoping you'd come." You set down your satchel and approach the bed. "How are you feeling?" "The same," he admits. "The cough is no better. I'm tired all the time, but I'm still here." You nod and begin your examination. It's the same examination you've performed dozens of times. You check his pulse, rapid and weak. You listen to his breathing laboured, with that persistent rattle. You examine his tongue coated and pale. You press your fingers against his neck, his chest, his abdomen, feeling for swellings or abnormalities. Everything is the same as it was 3 days ago, which means he's not getting better, but he's also not getting dramatically worse. He's in a kind of stasis, his body slowly failing but not yet ready to give up entirely. Your humours remain imbalanced, you say, which is your standard diagnosis, because it's vague enough to be always true. The phlegm in your lungs is excessive. We should continue the bloodletting to relieve the pressure. Godfrey nods. He's been through this many times. He extends his arm without being asked. You tie the cloth, make the cut, collect the blood. The ritual is so familiar you could do it in your sleep. Godfrey watches the blood flow into the bowl with a kind of detached interest. "Do you think I'll recover?" he asks. It's a question he asks every visit, and every visit you give him the same careful non-answer. "Your body is fighting," you say. "With continued treatment and God's grace, there's always hope." It's not a lie, exactly. There is always hope, in the sense that unlikely things sometimes happen. But realistically, Godfrey is dying. Slowly, but dying. The cough will worsen. The weakness will increase. One day, probably within the year, he'll develop a fever, or the cough will become so severe he can't breathe, and that will be the end. But you don't say this. Because what would be the point? He knows he's dying. His family knows. Everyone knows. Your job is not to confirm the obvious. It's to provide comfort in the face of it. You finish the bloodletting and apply a poultice to his chest. The same mixture of herbs and vinegar you've been using for months. You give him a dose of syrup for the cough. You adjust his pillows and make sure he's comfortable. "I'll return in 3 days," you say. "Thank you," Godfrey says, and he means it. Not because you're helping. You're not really. But because you're showing up. Because in a world where most people die alone and afraid, having someone who comes regularly, who performs rituals, who acts like there's still hope, that matters. You collect your payment, a few coins, always the same amount, and leave. Outside, the mill wheel continues its endless turning. The sound is almost soothing in its constancy. Aldwin is waiting by the stream, watching the water flow. "Will he die?" he asks when you approach. "Yes," you say. There's no point in lying to your apprentice. He needs to understand what this profession really is. Then why do we keep treating him? Because he's not dead yet. And while he's alive, he deserves whatever comfort we can provide. Even if it doesn't work. Especially if it doesn't work. Aldwin considers this. He's young enough that the world still seems like it should make sense. Like there should be clear answers and effective solutions. You remember feeling that way once. It's a pleasant delusion while it lasts. The afternoon brings you to Magda's cottage. Magda is a widow, perhaps 50 years old. living alone in a small structure at the edge of the settlement. She's been your patient for 6 weeks now, ever since she developed a wound on her leg that refuses to heal. You knock on the door. She calls for you to enter. Inside, the cottage is clean and sparse. Magda sits on a stool near the hearth, her injured leg extended. Even from the doorway you can smell it, the unmistakable odor of infection. "Physician," she says, her voice tired. "It's worse." You approach and kneel beside her leg. She's already unwrapped the bandage, revealing the wound. It's bad. Worse than last week. The wound itself is perhaps the size of your palm, located on her shin. The edges are red and swollen. The center is filled with yellowish fluid that drains constantly. The skin around it is hot to the touch. You've seen wounds like this before. They start small. A cut, a scrape, something minor. Then they become infected. The infection spreads. The flesh begins to rot. And eventually, if nothing is done, the rot spreads up the leg and the person dies. "We need to discuss amputation," you say quietly. Magda's face hardens. "No. The infection is spreading. If we don't remove the leg..." "No," she says again, more firmly. "I've told you before. I won't live as a cripple. I'd rather die." You sit back on your heels. This is the 3rd time you've had this conversation. Each time, she refuses. And you can't force her. It's her leg, her life, her choice. "Then we continue as we have been," you say. "I'll clean the wound and apply a fresh poultice." "But Magda, you need to understand." "I understand," she interrupts. "I understand perfectly. Now please, just do what you can." You nod and open your satchel. You clean the wound with wine. It's the best antiseptic you have, though you're not entirely sure why it works. Magda winces but doesn't cry out. She's tough. You'll give her that. The wound is deep enough that you can see bone in places. That's not good. Bone infections are almost always fatal. You apply a poultice, a mixture of honey, which seems to help wounds heal, and various herbs that probably don't do anything but smell medicinal. You wrap it with clean linen and tie it securely. "Change this twice a day," you tell her. "Keep it clean. If the redness spreads further up your leg, send for me immediately. And if it does spread," you meet her eyes. "Then we'll have the conversation about amputation again." She nods. "And I'll refuse again." "I know." You stand, your knees protesting. Magda reaches for her purse, but you wave her off. "Pay me when you're healed," you say. She laughs, a short, bitter sound. "Then I'll never pay you." "Perhaps." You leave her cottage feeling the familiar weight of futility. Magda is going to die. The infection will spread. She'll develop a fever, and within a few weeks she'll be gone. And there's nothing you can do about it because she's chosen death over amputation, and you can't say she's wrong. Would you want to live without a leg? Unable to work, dependent on others, a burden to your family? Maybe death is the better option. You honestly don't know. The sun is past its highest point now, beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. You're tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying other people's suffering all day. You head toward the church. Father Cuthbert is inside, as you expected. He's kneeling before the altar, praying. You wait quietly until he finishes and stands. "Physician," he says, turning. "I was hoping to see you." "Father, you've known Cuthbert for years. He's a good man, genuinely devoted to his calling, which makes him unusual among clergy. He actually believes in what he's doing, which you find both admirable and slightly tragic. "The merchant's children," he says. "I heard you were called this morning." "Yes. High fever, swollen lymph nodes. I've bled them and applied remedies. Will they recover?" You shrug. "God willing." It's the answer you give when you don't want to commit to a prediction. It's also true, in a sense. If the children recover, it will be because of factors beyond your control. Their own constitution, the nature of the illness, random chance. God's will is as good an explanation as any. "I'll pray for them," Cuthbert says. "That would be appreciated." You stand together in the quiet of the church. Light filters through the small windows, casting patterns on the stone floor. The air smells of incense and old stone. "Do you ever wonder," Cuthbert says quietly, "if what we do makes any difference?" You look at him, surprised. It's rare for him to express doubt. "Every day," you admit. "I pray for the sick. You treat them, and still they die. Not all of them. No. But most. You can't argue with that. Most people who get seriously ill do die, despite prayers and treatments and desperate interventions. Perhaps," you say slowly, "the point isn't whether we succeed. Perhaps the point is that we try." Cuthbert considers this. That's a comforting thought. I didn't say it was true. Just comforting. He smiles slightly. "You're a cynic, physician. I'm a realist. Is there a difference?" Probably not. You leave the church as the afternoon light begins to golden. Your shadow stretches long behind you as you walk back toward home. The settlement is quieter now. The market has mostly closed. People are returning to their homes, preparing evening meals, settling into the rhythm of day's end. You think about the merchant's children. By now, either the fever has broken or it hasn't. Either they're improving or they're not. You'll find out this evening when you return to check on them. You think about Godfrey lying in his bed, coughing. How many more visits before he dies? 10? 20? 100? There's no way to know. You think about Magda and her infected leg. How long before the infection spreads to her blood? A week? 2 weeks? She'll die in pain, probably, fever-ridden and delirious. But it will be her choice, and there's something to be said for that. You arrive home as the sun touches the horizon. Your companion has prepared dinner. A pottage of vegetables and barley, thick and warm. You eat it slowly, not tasting much, your mind elsewhere. Aldwyn mentions that one of Godfrey's servants came by asking for stronger herbs. You don't respond. Stronger herbs won't help. Nothing will help. But you'll prepare them anyway, because that's what you do. After dinner, you return to the apothecary. This is your favourite time of day, when the work is done and you can be alone with your supplies. You light candles, their warm glow pushing back the darkness. You move along the shelves, checking your stock. Some containers are running low. You'll need to gather more herbs soon, or purchase them at market. Some containers are full, their contents unused because you're not sure what they do or when to use them. You pick up a jar labelled cure-all and hold it up to the candlelight. Inside is a powder, greyish-brown, unremarkable. You purchased it 3 years ago from a travelling merchant who swore it could cure anything. You've used it occasionally, with no noticeable effect, but you keep it anyway, because what if it actually works, and you just haven't found the right application? That's the thing about medicine. You never know for certain what works and what doesn't. Sometimes people recover after you treat them. Sometimes they recover despite your treatment. Sometimes they die no matter what you do. The variables are too many. The outcomes too unpredictable. You can't run experiments. Each patient is different. Each illness unique. All you can do is try things and hope for the best. You set down the jar and pick up another. This one contains leeches. You lift the lid and peer inside. They're swimming lazily in their water, fat and healthy. You've named them, which is probably a sign of something concerning. There's Galen, after the ancient physician, Hippocrates, after another, and Bob, because you ran out of medical names. "Hello, Bob," you say quietly. Bob doesn't respond. He's a leech. But it's nice to have someone to talk to who doesn't expect answers. You close the lid and continue your inventory. Your mind drifts as you work, slipping into memory without conscious intention. You're a boy again, perhaps 10 years old. It's winter, and there's no food. The harvest failed that year. You don't remember why. Too much rain or too little. A blight, perhaps. But the result was the same. The grain stores ran empty. People began to starve. You remember your mother rationing what little food remained. A handful of barley mixed with water to make it stretch. The taste of bark soup, bitter and thin. Your younger sister, her bones showing through her skin, her eyes too large in her face. You remember the fear in your parents' voices when the tax collector came, demanding payment even though there was nothing to give. The tax doesn't care about your hunger. The tax doesn't care about anything except the tax. That winter lasted forever. People died. Your sister survived. But barely. You survived. Your family survived. But the memory of that hunger never left you. Even now, more than 40 years later, you can feel it. The hollow ache in your belly, the weakness in your limbs, the constant gnawing need. And then, in the spring, a plague came. The settlement was already weakened by hunger. When the illness arrived, it spread like fire through dry grass. People died in their homes, in the streets, in the church where they'd gone to pray for salvation. You remember your father. He was a physician too, though not a very good one, working day and night, trying to help. You followed him, learning by watching. You saw him bleed patients, apply poultices, prescribe remedies, and you saw them die anyway, one after another, until the dead outnumbered the living. Your father survived the plague, but something in him died during those months. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He continued practicing medicine, but without conviction. He was going through the motions, performing rituals he no longer believed in. He died when you were 20, not from plague or hunger, but from a simple fall. He hit his head and never woke up. You inherited his practice, his supplies, his patience, and his doubts. The memory fades, and you're back in the present, standing in your apothecary, surrounded by remedies you don't fully understand. You've been doing this for 30 years now. 30 years of treating patients, of performing rituals, of watching people die despite your best efforts. And you're no more certain now about what works than you were when you started. The thought is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it means you can stop pretending to know things you don't. Terrifying because it means all of this. The studying, the practicing, the careful preparation of remedies might be meaningless. But you can't stop. Because even if it's meaningless, even if nothing you do actually helps, people still need someone to show up. They need someone to perform the rituals, to offer hope, to sit with them in their suffering. And if that's all you can do, then that's what you'll do. You finish your inventory and blow out most of the candles, leaving just one burning. The apothecary falls into shadow, the bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling like strange fruit. You're about to leave when you remember you need to check on the merchant's children. You gather your satchel again, relight a torch, and head back out into the night. The settlement is dark now, just scattered points of light from windows and hearths. The air is cool and damp. Somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere a baby cries. You walk through the empty streets, your torch casting dancing shadows on the timber walls. The merchant's house is still lit. You knock, and the door opens immediately. The merchant's face is drawn but less panicked than this morning. "How are they?" you ask. "Better," he says, and you hear the relief in his voice. "The fever broke this afternoon. They're sleeping now, but peacefully. Not that restless, fevered sleep." You follow him upstairs. The children are indeed sleeping. Their breathing slower and more regular. You check each one. Their skin is cooler, their pulses stronger. The swellings in their necks have reduced slightly. They're recovering. You feel a mixture of relief and something else. Not quite pride, because you're not sure you actually did anything to help. But satisfaction, perhaps. The rituals were performed and the children survived. Whether there's a causal relationship is unclear, but the outcome is good. Continue the remedies for another few days, you tell the merchant. Keep them resting. Give them broth and water. They should continue to improve. The merchant grasps your hand. "Thank you. Thank you. You've saved them." You want to say, "I didn't save them. Their own bodies saved them. I just performed some rituals and hoped for the best." But you don't say this, because he needs to believe you saved them. He needs to believe that medicine works, that physicians have power over illness. And who are you to take that away from him? "I'm glad they're recovering," you say instead. He presses coins into your hand, more than you expected, more than you probably deserve. You accept them with a nod of thanks. Outside, you stand for a moment in the darkness, feeling the weight of the coins in your hand. 3 children who were dying this morning are now recovering. Did your bloodletting help? Did the poultices, the remedies, the prayers, or would they have recovered anyway, regardless of what you did? There's no way to know. And that's the fundamental problem with medicine. You can't separate what you do from what would have happened naturally. You can't run the experiment twice, once with treatment and once without. All you can do is try things and observe the results. And sometimes the results are good, and sometimes they're not. And you never really know why. You walk home slowly, in no hurry now. The night is quiet. The stars are visible through gaps in the clouds, cold and distant. You think about Godfrey, who will die despite your treatments. You think about Magda, who will die because she refuses treatment. You think about the merchant's children, who will live, possibly because of your treatment, or possibly despite it. This is medicine. This is what you do. You show up. You perform rituals. You offer hope. And sometimes people survive, and sometimes they don't. And you collect your payment either way. It's not heroic. It's not even particularly effective. But it's what you have. You arrive home to find your companion waiting up for you. They don't ask how it went. They can read it in your face. The children are recovering, you say. They nod, unsurprised. That's good, yes. You sit together by the dying fire, not speaking. There's nothing that needs to be said. You've had this conversation 1,000 times, in words and in silence. Eventually you rise and prepare for bed. Your body is heavy with the day's work, your mind quiet with exhaustion. You lie down on the straw mattress, feeling it compress beneath you. Your companion settles beside you. The room is dark and cool. Tomorrow you'll wake and do it all again. More patients, more rituals, more uncertain outcomes. Godfrey will still be dying. Magda's wound will still be infected. New patients will arrive with new problems you can't solve. But tonight, 3 children are sleeping peacefully, their fevers broken. And that's something. It has to be something. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts drift. The weight of sleep becomes irresistible. And somewhere in the darkness, between waking and sleeping, you think, maybe that's enough. Maybe showing up is enough. Maybe performing the rituals is enough, even when they don't work. Maybe the point isn't to cure everyone. Maybe the point is just to try. The thought is comforting, even if you're not sure it's true. Sleep takes you gently, and for a few hours, you're free from the weight of other people's suffering. But you're not the first physician to stand in the darkness, wondering if anything you do matters. You're not the first to perform rituals. You don't fully understand. To watch patients die despite your best efforts. To collect payment for services that may or may not have helped. This has been going on for centuries. Let me tell you about some of your predecessors. Real physicians, documented in real texts, who faced the same problems you face now. Who had the same doubts, the same failures, the same desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they were actually helping. Their stories are your story. Their failures are your failures. And their occasional successes, well, those are probably just as mysterious as yours. In the 6th century, there lived a man named Cassiodorus. He was many things: a statesman, a monk, a scholar, and occasionally, when pressed, something resembling a physician. Cassiodorus didn't set out to practice medicine. He set out to preserve knowledge, which in the 6th century meant copying ancient texts and hoping someone in the future would understand them better than you did. But when you're a learned man in a monastery and someone gets sick, people assume you can help. After all, you can read Latin. You own books. Surely you must know something about healing. Cassiodorus knew approximately as much about healing as you do, which is to say, not much, but enough to sound convincing. He wrote extensively about the importance of examining a patient's pulse, not just whether it was fast or slow, but its quality. Was it strong or weak? Regular or irregular? Did it feel hot or cold to the touch? He developed an entire system of pulse diagnosis, with different types of pulses indicating different imbalances of humors. A rapid, bounding pulse meant excess heat. A weak, thready pulse meant deficiency of blood. A pulse that felt like it was skipping meant, well, something bad. Probably. The thing is, Cassiodorus was right that pulse matters. A rapid pulse does often indicate fever or infection. A weak pulse does suggest the body is struggling, but his explanations for why were completely wrong. He thought the pulse was the humors literally moving through the body, like water through pipes. He thought you could feel the quality of someone's blood by touching their wrist. He thought the pulse changed based on the position of the stars. None of this was true, but it sounded medical, and it gave him something to do while examining patients, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes. People recovered after he examined their pulse and prescribed remedies based on what he felt. Cassiodorus also wrote extensively about uroscopy, the examination of urine. This was his specialty, his claim to expertise. He could look at a sample of urine and tell you everything about the patient's condition. The color indicated which humor was imbalanced. The clarity showed how severe the imbalance was. The smell revealed whether the corruption was hot or cold in nature. He had charts, detailed charts showing different colors of urine and what they meant. Clear and pale, deficiency of heat. Deep yellow, excess of bile. Cloudy, corruption of phlegm. Dark brown, black bile. Very serious. Red, blood in the urine, extremely serious. And if the urine had sediment? That was the body trying to expel the corrupted humors. Good sign. Unless the sediment was the wrong color, in which case it was a bad sign. Cassiodorus would hold the urine flask up to the light, swirl it gently, sniff it carefully, and then pronounce his diagnosis with complete confidence. The patient would nod, impressed by his thoroughness. The family would feel reassured that such a learned man was examining their loved one. And Cassiodorus would prescribe remedies based on his urine analysis. Herbs to cool the heat, or warm the cold, or dry the moisture, or moisten the dryness. Did any of this work? Unclear. But it looked impressive, and looking impressive is half of medicine. The other half is luck, and Cassiodorus had his share of that too. One documented case from his writings: a monk developed a fever and began passing dark urine. Cassiodorus examined the sample and declared it showed excess of black bile, complicated by heat. He prescribed cooling herbs, bloodletting, and prayer. The monk recovered within a week. Cassiodorus wrote about this case as proof of his diagnostic skill. He explained in detail how the urine's color had indicated the exact nature of the imbalance, and how his treatment had restored harmony to the humors. What he didn't mention: 3 other monks had the same fever at the same time. 2 of them recovered without any treatment. 1 died despite receiving the same treatment as the survivor. But Cassiodorus only wrote about the success, because that's what you do when you're trying to establish yourself as a medical authority. You document your successes and quietly forget your failures. He also wrote extensively about the importance of diet in maintaining health. This was actually one of his more sensible contributions. He understood that what people ate affected their health, even if his explanations for why were completely wrong. He believed that foods had inherent qualities: hot or cold, moist or dry, and that you needed to balance these qualities to maintain health. If you had too much heat in your body, you should eat cold foods. Too much moisture, eat dry foods. His dietary recommendations were elaborate. Bread was hot and dry. Fish was cold and moist. Meat was hot and moist. Vegetables were cold and dry, except for the ones that were cold and moist, or hot and dry, depending on which vegetable and which ancient text you consulted. He spent years compiling lists of foods and their qualities, cross-referencing ancient authorities, trying to create a comprehensive guide to therapeutic eating. The result was a confusing mess of contradictory advice that probably didn't help anyone. But it looked scholarly, and it gave patients something concrete to do: change their diet, which made them feel like they were taking action against their illness. And sometimes, purely by chance, his dietary advice actually helped. If someone had scurvy and he recommended they eat more vegetables, they might improve. Not because vegetables were cold and moist, but because they contained vitamin C. But Cassiodorus didn't know about vitamins. He just knew that sometimes his recommendations worked, and that was enough. Later in life, Cassiodorus founded a monastery at Vivarium, where he established a scriptorium for copying medical texts. He believed that preserving ancient medical knowledge was crucial for future generations. He spent his final years copying works by Hippocrates, Galen, and other ancient physicians. He didn't understand most of what he was copying. The texts were in Greek, and his Greek was mediocre at best. But he copied them faithfully, preserving them for scholars who might someday understand them better. It's almost touching, in a way. This man who spent his life practicing medicine he didn't fully understand, who diagnosed illnesses based on urine color and pulse quality, who prescribed remedies that probably didn't work. He knew, on some level, that he didn't have all the answers. So he preserved the questions. He copied the texts. He passed the knowledge forward, incomplete and confusing as it was, hoping that someone in the future would make sense of it. He died in his monastery, surrounded by his books and his copied texts, probably still believing that pulse diagnosis and uroscopy were the keys to understanding illness. He was wrong. But he was trying. And in the 6th century, trying was about all anyone could do. In the 7th century, there was a monk named Bede. You might know him as the Venerable Bede, historian and scholar. What you might not know is that he also documented numerous cases of miraculous healing, some of which, if you squint and ignore the supernatural elements, look suspiciously like medical interventions. Bede didn't practice medicine himself. He was a historian, recording the lives of saints and the miracles they performed. But in doing so, he inadvertently documented some of the medical practices of his time, wrapped in the language of divine intervention. Take, for example, his account of Saint Cuthbert. Cuthbert was a bishop and hermit who lived in the late 7th century. According to Bede, he performed numerous healing miracles. The sick would come to him, he would pray over them, and they would be cured. But if you read Bede's descriptions carefully, some of these miracles sound a lot like medical treatment. One case. A woman came to Cuthbert with a severe headache that had lasted for weeks. Cuthbert prayed over her, then placed his hands on her head, pressing firmly on specific points. The headache disappeared. Miracle. Or just manual therapy, applying pressure to relieve tension. Bede calls it a miracle. You might call it an early form of massage therapy. Another case. A man with a swollen, infected wound on his leg. Cuthbert examined the wound, cleaned it with water, applied a poultice of herbs, and prayed. The infection cleared within days. Miracle. Or just basic wound care. Cleaning, herbal treatment, and time. Bede emphasizes the prayer. You might emphasize the cleaning and herbs. The thing is, Bede genuinely believed these were miracles. He wasn't trying to document medical practices. He was trying to demonstrate Cuthbert's holiness, his special connection to God, but in doing so, he preserved descriptions of actual medical interventions. The prayers were important to Bede, the physical actions, the pressing on the head, the cleaning of the wound, the application of herbs. Those were just details, barely worth mentioning. But those details are what actually mattered. Those details are what might have actually helped. Bede also documented cases where Cuthbert's interventions didn't work. A young boy dying of plague. Cuthbert prayed over him, blessed him, gave him holy water to drink. The boy died anyway. Bede explains this as God's will. The boy was meant to die, and even a saint's prayers couldn't change that. It was a test of faith, a reminder that earthly life is temporary. You might explain it differently. The boy had plague. Plague kills people. Prayer doesn't cure plague. The boy died because that's what happens when you have plague and no effective treatment. But Bede couldn't think that way. In his worldview, everything happened for a reason, and that reason was divine will. If someone recovered after prayer, it was a miracle. If they died despite prayer, it was God's plan. There was no room in his thinking for the possibility that prayer simply didn't affect the outcome. That recovery or death depended on factors beyond anyone's control. The severity of the illness, the patient's constitution, random chance. Another case from Bede's writings. A monk developed a tumor on his eyelid. It grew larger over time, eventually threatening his vision. The monastery's physician. Yes, they had a physician. Examined it and recommended cutting it out. The monk was terrified of the procedure, so he went to Cuthbert instead, asking for a miracle. Cuthbert examined the tumor, then told the monk, "Go to the physician. Let him cut it out. I will pray for you, and God will guide his hand." The monk reluctantly agreed. The physician performed the surgery, cutting away the tumor with a sharp blade, cauterizing the wound with a hot iron. The monk screamed. The procedure was brutal, but it worked. The tumor was removed, the wound healed, and the monk's vision was saved. Bede records this as a miracle. Cuthbert's prayers guided the physician's hand, ensuring success. You might record it differently. A skilled physician performed a successful surgery. The prayers were nice, but the physician's skill was what mattered. But here's the interesting thing. Cuthbert didn't claim to perform the miracle himself. He sent the monk to the physician. He acknowledged that physical intervention was necessary. This was unusual for the time. Most saints in Bede's writings performed miracles directly. They touched the sick, prayed, and healing happened. Cuthbert was more pragmatic. He prayed, yes, but he also recognized when physical intervention was needed. Was he a secret rationalist, hiding behind religious language? Or did he genuinely believe that God worked through physicians as well as through miracles? Probably the latter. But the result was the same. He encouraged medical treatment, even while framing it in religious terms. Bede also documented the use of relics in healing. This was a major practice in the 7th century. The bones, clothing, or possessions of saints were believed to have healing power. The sick would touch these relics, or drink water that had been blessed by contact with them, and sometimes they would recover. Bede recorded dozens of such cases. A woman with a fever touched a piece of cloth that had belonged to a saint, and the fever broke. A man with paralysis drank water that had been poured over a saint's tomb, and he regained movement in his limbs. Miracles, according to Bede. Placebo effect, according to modern medicine. But here's the thing. The placebo effect is real. If someone believes strongly enough that something will help them, sometimes it does. Not because of any physical property of the treatment, but because belief itself can affect the body's response. So were these relic healings miracles? Or were they just the power of belief, channeled through religious objects? Bede would say miracles. You might say psychology. But the outcome was. The same people felt better, and that's what mattered. One of Bede's most detailed medical accounts involves a plague outbreak. A monastery was struck by a severe illness. High fever, swelling of the lymph nodes, rapid death. Bede doesn't identify the specific disease, but it sounds like bubonic plague or something similar. The monks tried everything. They prayed. They fasted. They performed penance. They called in physicians who bled the sick and applied poultices. Nothing worked. The monks continued dying, one after another. Finally, in desperation, they sent for Cuthbert. Cuthbert arrived and assessed the situation. Then he did something unusual. He ordered the monastery sealed. No one could enter or leave. The sick were isolated in a separate building. The healthy monks were to avoid contact with them. He also ordered that all bedding and clothing from the sick be burned, that the rooms be cleaned with vinegar and water, that anyone who tended the sick must wash thoroughly afterward. And he prayed constantly. He led the monks in prayer, asking for God's mercy. The plague continued for several more weeks. More monks died. But eventually, the outbreak ended. The monastery survived. Bede records this as a miracle. Cuthbert's prayers stopped the plague. You might record it differently. Cuthbert implemented quarantine measures. He isolated the sick, destroyed contaminated materials, enforced hygiene. These are basic public health measures that actually work to stop disease spread. The prayers were important to the monks. But the quarantine was what actually mattered. Did Cuthbert understand germ theory? Of course not. Germ theory wouldn't be developed for another 1,000 years. But he understood, through observation or intuition or divine inspiration, take your pick, that illness could spread from person to person and that separating the sick from the healthy could stop that spread. It's one of the few documented cases from the Dark Ages of effective public health intervention, and Bede recorded it as a miracle, barely mentioning the practical measures that actually made the difference. Bede died in 735, still believing in miracles, still recording the deeds of saints. His historical works preserved countless details about life in the 7th and 8th centuries, including medical practices that would otherwise have been lost. He never questioned whether the miracles were really miracles. He never considered that natural explanations might account for the healings he documented. But in preserving these stories, he preserved evidence of early medical practice, the good, the bad, and the ineffective. And for that, historians are grateful, even if Bede would be confused by their gratitude. Because to Bede, these weren't medical case studies. They were proof of God's power. To you, they're proof that people have been trying to heal the sick for centuries, using whatever tools and beliefs they had available. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. But they kept trying. Just like you. Somewhere in the 8th century, the exact date and location are lost to history. Someone wrote a surgical manual. We don't know their name. We don't know where they practiced. We only have fragments of their text, copied and recopied by monks who may or may not have understood what they were copying. But what survives is fascinating and horrifying. And occasionally, almost competent. The manual covers various surgical procedures, removing tumors, treating wounds, amputating limbs, trepanning skulls. It's written in practical, matter-of-fact language, as if the author is simply describing their daily work, which they probably were. Let's start with tumor removal, since that's relatively straightforward. The manual describes how to remove a tumor from the skin, or just beneath it. First, you examine the tumor carefully. Is it attached to deeper structures? Is it near major blood vessels? If yes to either, don't cut. You'll kill the patient. If the tumor is superficial and not near anything vital, proceed. You'll need a sharp knife, wine for cleaning, silk thread for tying off blood vessels, a cautery iron heated in the fire, and someone strong to hold the patient down. The patient should fast beforehand. An empty stomach means less vomiting during the procedure, which is important because vomiting while someone is cutting you open is dangerous for everyone involved. Give the patient wine to drink. A lot of wine. Enough that they're drunk but not unconscious. You need them somewhat aware so they can tell you if you're cutting too deep, but not so aware that they fight you. Position the patient so the tumor is easily accessible. Have your assistant hold them firmly. They will try to move. Everyone tries to move when you start cutting. Clean the area with wine. Make your incision quickly and decisively. Hesitation causes more pain and more bleeding. Cut around the tumor, going deep enough to get beneath it, but not so deep that you hit muscle or bone. The patient will scream. This is normal. Ignore it and continue working. Once you've cut around the tumor, lift it out. If it's attached to deeper tissue, cut those attachments carefully. If you encounter a blood vessel, tie it off with silk thread before cutting it. If you can't tie it off, cauterize it immediately with the hot iron. The smell of burning flesh is unpleasant. You'll get used to it. Once the tumor is removed, examine the wound. Is there any remaining abnormal tissue? Cut it out. Better to cut too much than too little. Tumors that aren't completely removed tend to grow back. Clean the wound thoroughly with wine. Then cauterize the entire surface with the hot iron. This stops bleeding and, according to the manual, prevents corruption from entering. The manual doesn't explain what corruption is or how cauterization prevents it. But it works, sort of. Cauterization does reduce infection rates, though not for the reasons the manual suggests. The heat kills something. Bacteria, though the surgeon doesn't know that word, and seals the wound in a way that makes it harder for infection to take hold. Not impossible, just harder. The patient, if they survive the procedure, will spend the next week in agony as the burn heals. The wound will weep clear fluid, then yellow pus, then hopefully begin to close. Or it won't, and they'll die of fever and corruption anyway. The manual doesn't dwell on failure rates. It simply moves on to the next procedure. The manual is equally matter-of-fact about amputation. When a limb is corrupted beyond saving blackened, foul-smelling, or causing fever that will not abate, it must be removed entirely. The longer you wait, the more the corruption spreads into the body and the patient will die. The procedure is described in careful detail, as if removing a leg were no different from removing a tumor. Perhaps to the surgeon it isn't. First, gather your tools. You'll need a sharp knife for cutting through skin and muscle, a bone saw for cutting through the bone itself, silk thread for tying off blood vessels, a cautery iron heated until it glows red, and several strong assistants to hold the patient down. You'll also need a leather strap or wooden rod for the patient to bite on. They will need it. Position the patient on a sturdy table. If possible, give them wine or ale beforehand, enough to dull the senses, but not so much that they vomit during the procedure. Vomiting complicates everything. Tie a tourniquet tightly around the limb, well above the point where you intend to cut. This reduces blood loss. The manual recommends using a thick leather strap twisted tight with a wooden rod. The limb below the tourniquet will turn pale, then bluish. This is expected. Mark the cutting line with a piece of charcoal or a knife tip. You want to cut through healthy tissue, not diseased tissue. Leave yourself room to work. It's better to take more than necessary than to leave corruption behind. Have your assistants hold the patient firmly, one on each shoulder, one holding the affected limb, one ready to hand you tools. The patient will thrash. Even the strongest person loses control when you start cutting. Make your first incision quickly, cutting through the skin in a circular motion around the limb. The knife should be sharp enough that it slices cleanly. Dull blades tear, and tearing causes unnecessary suffering. Blood will flow despite the tourniquet. This is normal. Ignore it and continue. Once you've cut through the skin, pull it back to expose the muscle beneath. Cut through the muscle in the same circular motion, working your way down to the bone. The muscle is tougher than skin. It requires more pressure, more sawing motion with the blade. The patient is screaming now. Your assistants are struggling to hold them still. You focus on the work. Emotion is a distraction. When you reach the bone, set aside the knife and take up the saw. Bone is hard. Sawing through it requires strength and patience. The saw's teeth catch and drag. You push forward, pull back, push forward, pull back. The sound is distinctive, a grinding, scraping noise that sets teeth on edge. The patient may faint at this point. If they do, it's a mercy. If they don't, they'll remember this sound for the rest of their life, however long that may be. Keep sawing. The bone will resist, then suddenly give way as you cut through the final section. The limb comes free. One of your assistants takes it away. You don't watch where it goes. That's not your concern. Now comes the dangerous part. Controlling the bleeding. Release the tourniquet slightly. Blood will surge from the severed vessels. Quickly identify the largest ones. They'll be spurting rhythmically with each heartbeat. Tie them off with silk thread, knotting tightly. Work fast. The patient is losing blood with every moment. Smaller vessels can be cauterized. Press the hot iron against them. The blood sizzles and stops. The smell is overwhelming. Burned blood. Burned flesh. Something acrid and wrong. Once the major bleeding is controlled, examine the stump. Is there any remaining diseased tissue? Cut it away. Are there bone fragments or splinters? Remove them. The stump should be as clean as possible. Now cauterize the entire surface. This is the worst part for the patient, if they're still conscious. The hot iron against raw flesh and exposed bone. The body convulses. The assistants hold firm. When the cauterization is complete, fold the skin flaps over the stump and stitch them closed. The stitches don't need to be neat, they just need to hold. Use thick thread and pull it tight. Bandage the stump with clean linen soaked in wine or vinegar. Change the bandages daily. Watch for signs of fever, foul smell, or spreading redness. If these appear, the corruption has taken hold despite your efforts, and the patient will likely die. If they survive the first week, they have a chance. Not a good chance, but a chance. The manual notes, almost as an afterthought, that patients who lose limbs often lose the will to live. They become melancholic, refuse food, and waste away despite surviving the surgery. This is a failure of the spirit, not the body, the manual states. There is no remedy for it. The surgeon is expected to move on to the next patient. Of all the procedures described in the manual, trepanation is perhaps the most audacious. The idea is simple, if horrifying. When a patient suffers from severe headaches, seizures, madness, or head trauma, the solution is to drill a hole in their skull, to release the trapped spirits or corrupted humors causing the problem. The manual is confident about this. The skull is a closed vessel. When pressure builds within, it must be released, just as one would pierce a swollen abscess. The comparison is not reassuring. The procedure begins, as always, with preparation. Shave the patient's head completely. Mark the spot where you intend to drill, usually over the area of pain or injury, though sometimes the manual recommends drilling over the temples or crown, where the spirits are most likely to gather. The patient should be restrained. Trepanation requires the head to remain absolutely still, and no one remains still while someone drills into their skull. The tool is called a trepan, a cylindrical drill with a sharp circular cutting edge. Some are hand-cranked, others are twisted with a bow-like device. The principle is the same. Rotate the blade against the bone until it cuts through. Place the trepan against the marked spot. Begin drilling slowly, applying steady downward pressure. The bone resists at first, then begins to powder under the blade. The sound is similar to sawing bone, but higher pitched, more grinding. The patient is conscious for this. There's no way around it. They feel the pressure, the vibration, the wrongness of something cutting into their skull. They scream or whimper or go silent with shock. You continue drilling. The skull is thicker than you'd expect, sometimes as thick as a finger's width. The drilling takes time. Your hand cramps. Your assistant wipes sweat from your forehead. The patient's blood runs down their face in thin rivulets. You'll know you're getting close when the bone dust changes color, from white to pink, meaning you're nearing the inner surface. Slow down now. If you drill too far, you'll pierce the membrane covering the brain itself, and that often leads to death. When you've cut almost through, stop drilling. Use a small chisel or lever to carefully lift out the circular piece of bone. It comes free with a soft cracking sound. Beneath it, you can see the membrane covering the brain, the dura mater, though the manual doesn't call it that. It's grayish-white, slightly translucent, pulsing gently with the patient's heartbeat. If there's blood pooled beneath the skull, a hematoma from trauma, you'll see it now as a dark mass pressing against the membrane. Carefully pierce the membrane and drain the blood. This, at least, sometimes actually helps. Relieving pressure on the brain can save a patient's life. If there's no blood, just the normal brain beneath, you've accomplished something. The manual claims the hole allows evil humors to escape. You're not sure what's escaping, if anything, but the patient is still alive, which is more than you expected. Clean the wound with wine. Place a small piece of cloth or leather over the hole. You can't leave the brain exposed. Bandage the head thoroughly. The patient will either recover or die. If they recover, they'll have a permanent hole in their skull, covered only by skin and scar tissue. They'll need to be careful for the rest of their life. A blow to that spot could be fatal. If they die, it will likely be from infection. The brain, it turns out, does not respond well to having holes drilled near it. The manual records a success rate, but doesn't define what success means. Survival? Improvement of symptoms? Simply not dying on the table. You suspect the definition is flexible. The manual's section on infected wounds is the longest, which tells you something about how common they are. Corruption enters through breaks in the skin. It begins. Once inside, it spreads through the flesh, causing heat, swelling, redness, and foul-smelling discharge. If not treated, the corruption will spread to the blood, causing fever and death. The treatments described are varied and mostly ineffective. First, clean the wound thoroughly. Use wine, vinegar, or boiled water. Remove any foreign material, dirt, cloth, splinters. This part, at least, makes sense. Clean wounds heal better than dirty ones. Next, apply a poultice. The manual lists dozens of recipes: crushed garlic and honey, bread soaked in wine and herbs, ground charcoal mixed with egg whites, spider webs, which apparently helps stop bleeding, moss from a skull, which apparently does nothing but sounds impressive. Change the poultice daily. Watch for signs of improvement, reduce swelling, less redness, discharge that changes from yellow-green to clear. If the wound worsens despite treatment, you have limited options. You can try cutting away the infected flesh debridement, though the manual doesn't use that term. Cut until you reach tissue that bleeds red and looks healthy. This is agonizing for the patient and often doesn't work. The infection has usually spread beyond what you can see. You can try cauterization, burning the infected area with hot iron. This sometimes stops the spread, but just as often it simply adds burn damage to the existing infection. You can try amputation if the infection is in a limb. Remove the entire infected area and hope the corruption hasn't already spread to the rest of the body. Or you can do nothing and wait. Sometimes the body fights off the infection on its own. Sometimes it doesn't. The manual is honest about this. Many infected wounds cannot be saved. The physician must recognize when treatment is futile and prepare the patient for death. How do you prepare someone for death? The manual doesn't say. Presumably with prayer, comfort, and the knowledge that you tried everything you could, even if everything you could do was nowhere near enough. What strikes you most, reading these old surgical manuals, is the matter-of-fact tone. There's no horror, no apology, no acknowledgement that what's being described is almost unimaginably painful. The patient will scream, "This is normal." Hold them firmly. They will struggle. The smell of burning flesh is unpleasant. You'll get used to it. These surgeons weren't monsters. They were trying to help. But they existed in a world without anesthesia, without antibiotics, without any real understanding of why infections happened or how to prevent them. So they cut and burned and drilled. And they did it while their patients were fully conscious, fully aware, fully experiencing every moment of agony. And then they moved on to the next patient. Because what else could they do? You think about this sometimes, late at night in your apothecary, surrounded by your own inadequate remedies. You have more knowledge than those old surgeons. You understand humoral theory, even if it's mostly wrong. You know which herbs have genuine medicinal properties, even if you can't always explain why. But you're still cutting into people without anesthesia. You're still watching them die from infections you can't cure. You're still performing procedures that are as likely to kill as to save. The tools have changed. The understanding has improved, marginally. But the fundamental experience, the desperate attempt to heal in the face of overwhelming ignorance, remains the same. You are not so different from that anonymous surgeon, carefully writing down his procedures in the hope that someone, someday, might find them useful. You're both just trying. And trying is all anyone has ever been able to do. In your time, there are no medical boards, no licensing requirements, no oversight committees. There's no standardized training, no oath you must swear, no legal framework governing what you can and cannot do to a patient. This sounds like freedom. It's actually terrifying. Because it means that when a patient dies under your care, and they will, frequently, there's no clear answer to the question, was this your fault? The answer depends on who you ask. The Church says you have a responsibility to God. You must treat the sick as an act of Christian charity. You must not charge excessive fees from the poor. You must recognize when a patient is beyond earthly help and call for a priest to administer last rites. But the Church also says that all healing ultimately comes from God. which conveniently absolves you of responsibility when your treatments fail. The patient died because God willed it, not because you bled them too aggressively or gave them the wrong herb. The local lord or magistrate says you have a responsibility to public order. You must treat plague victims, even at risk to yourself. You must report certain diseases to authorities. You must not cause panic by declaring an epidemic prematurely. But they also expect you to cure people, which you often cannot do, and they become angry when important people die despite your efforts. Their anger rarely has legal consequences, but it can have social ones. A physician who loses too many wealthy patients finds themselves without wealthy patients. Your patients say you have a responsibility to help them. They come to you in pain, in fear, in desperation. They trust you to know what you're doing. That trust is often misplaced, but they don't know that. And you don't tell them. Your fellow physicians say you have a responsibility to the profession. Don't undercut other physicians' fees. Don't publicly criticize their treatments, even when those treatments are obviously harmful. Don't admit uncertainty. It makes all physicians look incompetent. This last one bothers you the most, because you are uncertain, constantly, about almost everything. But admitting that would destroy the carefully constructed illusion that keeps patients coming to you, instead of to the wise woman down the road, or the traveling charlatan selling miracle cures. So you maintain the illusion. You speak with confidence. You use Latin terms. You reference ancient authorities like Galen and Hippocrates. And you hope that confidence, even false confidence, provides some comfort. This is a question you wrestle with often. The old surgical manual says you should refuse to treat patients who are clearly dying. Do not waste your efforts on those whom God has already claimed. Your reputation will suffer when they die, and you will have neglected patients who could be saved. It's practical advice. Brutal, but practical. But how do you know who's dying and who might be saved? You've seen patients you thought were doomed make miraculous recoveries. You've seen patients with minor ailments suddenly decline and die. You've learned to trust your instincts, but your instincts are often wrong. So you've developed your own guidelines, unwritten but firm. You refuse to treat patients who cannot pay and have no one to vouch for them. This sounds cruel, but you have to eat. You have to buy supplies. You cannot treat everyone for free. You refuse to perform procedures you've never done before on patients who have other options. If someone needs a complex surgery and there's a more experienced surgeon available, you send them there. Pride is not worth a life. You refuse to treat patients whose families are clearly looking for someone to blame. You can sense it in their questions, their tone, their eyes. They've already decided that if their loved one dies, it will be your fault. You cannot win in that situation, so you don't try. You refuse to promise cures. You promise to try. You promise to do your best. But you never promise success. And sometimes, late at night, when a patient is clearly suffering and clearly dying, you refuse to prolong their agony. You give them something for the pain poppy extract, if you have it, or strong wine if you don't, and you sit with them, and you let them go. The church would call this murder. You call it mercy. You don't discuss it with anyone. They die often, more often than they survive, if you're honest about it. When a poor patient dies, their family grieves, buries them, and moves on. They may blame you, but they have no recourse. They cannot afford a lawsuit, and the local authorities don't care about the death of a peasant. When a wealthy patient dies, things become complicated. Sometimes the family accepts it. Death is common, after all. They thank you for your efforts, pay your fee, and that's the end of it. Sometimes they become angry. They accuse you of incompetence, of using the wrong treatment, of giving up too soon. They don't pay your fee. They spread rumors about you. Other wealthy families hear these rumors and stop calling for you. Your income drops. Your reputation suffers. You have no legal recourse because there's no law that says they must pay you or that they cannot slander you. Very rarely a family will take legal action. They'll bring you before the local magistrate or lord, accusing you of causing the death through negligence or malice. These cases are terrifying because the outcome is unpredictable. There's no standard of care you can point to, no expert witnesses who can testify that you followed proper procedures. It comes down to, did the magistrate like you? Did the family have more influence than you? Did the political winds favor physicians or favor angry nobles? You've been fortunate. You've never been formally accused. But you know physicians who have been, and the outcomes range from fines to public humiliation to, in one case, execution. That last one was probably deserved. The physician had been drunk and had amputated the wrong leg. But still, the possibility exists. Every time you treat a patient, especially a wealthy or powerful one, you're aware that if things go wrong, you could lose everything. So you're careful. You document your treatments. You make sure witnesses are present for risky procedures. You cultivate relationships with priests and local officials who might speak on your behalf if needed. And you try very, very hard not to kill anyone important. Here's the strange thing. For all the fear, for all the potential consequences, there's actually very little formal legal liability. There are no malpractice laws. There's no licensing board that can revoke your right to practice. There's no professional organization that can censure you. If you're incompetent, the market will eventually correct for it. Patients will stop coming to you, and you'll be forced to find another profession. If you're malicious, you might face criminal charges, but those are rare and hard to prove. If you're simply unlucky, if your patients die despite your best efforts, there's no legal framework that says you did anything wrong. This should be comforting. It's not. Because the absence of formal liability doesn't mean the absence of consequences. It just means the consequences are unpredictable, personal, and often devastating in ways that have nothing to do with law. A physician whose patients die becomes known as a physician whose patients die. People stop trusting you. Your income disappears. Your social standing crumbles. And there's no appeals process, no way to prove that you were actually competent and just had bad luck. You live or die by reputation. And reputation is built on outcomes you cannot fully control. So you do what you can. You try to help. You try not to harm. You try to manage expectations so that when patients die, and they will, their families understand that death was always a possibility. And you live with the knowledge that someday, despite your best efforts, you will be blamed for a death you could not prevent. It's already happened, actually, multiple times. You've just been lucky that the families were forgiving or powerless. You don't expect that luck to last forever. It's late now. The apothecary is dark, except for a single candle. Beatrice is asleep. Aldwyn is asleep. The settlement is quiet. You're sitting at your work table, surrounded by the tools of your trade. Jars of herbs, bottles of tinctures, lancets for bloodletting, bandages waiting to be used. You've been thinking about those old surgeons, the ones who wrote the manuals you've been reading, the ones who cut and burned and drilled without anesthesia, without antibiotics, without any real understanding of what they were doing. and you've been thinking about yourself. Are you any better than they were? You have more knowledge, certainly. You understand that some herbs genuinely help. Willow bark for pain, honey for wounds, certain molds that seem to prevent infection. You understand that cleanliness matters, even if you don't fully understand why. You understand that bloodletting doesn't cure most things, even though you still do it because patients expect it, and because sometimes, inexplicably, it seems to help. But knowledge and understanding are not the same as effectiveness. You still watch patients die from infections you cannot cure. You still perform procedures that are as likely to kill as to save. You still prescribe treatments based more on tradition and hope than on evidence. You are, in most ways that matter, exactly like those old surgeons. You're just more aware of your own ignorance. Is that better? You're not sure. Awareness doesn't save lives. It just makes you more conscious of the lives you're failing to save. You've been practicing medicine for 30 years. In that time, you've treated thousands of patients. How many have you actually cured? It's a difficult question to answer because cure is a slippery concept. Did you cure the patient whose fever broke after you bled them? Or would the fever have broken anyway? Did you cure the patient whose wound healed after you applied a honey poultice? Or did their body heal itself while you watched? You've certainly helped people. You've set broken bones that healed straight. You've stitched wounds that closed cleanly. You've delivered babies who lived. But you've also bled people who died anyway. You've applied poultices to wounds that became infected. You've delivered babies who didn't survive, and mothers who didn't survive, and sometimes neither survived. The successes and failures blur together after a while. What you're left with is a vague sense that sometimes you help, sometimes you harm, and most of the time you're simply present while the body does whatever it was going to do anyway. Is that progress? Compared to the surgeons of 200 years ago, yes, marginally. You're slightly less likely to kill your patients through sheer incompetence. Compared to what medicine might be 200 years from now, probably not. Future physicians will look back at your bloodletting and your humoral theory and your complete ignorance of germs, and they'll shake their heads in disbelief. Just as you shake your head at the old surgical manuals. Progress, you've come to believe, is not a straight line from ignorance to knowledge. It's a stumbling, uncertain path where each generation does slightly better than the last, while still getting most things wrong. And that has to be enough. Because the alternative, believing that all your efforts are meaningless, that medicine is just an elaborate performance with no real effect, is too depressing to contemplate. So you choose to believe that trying matters, that the attempt to heal, even when it fails, is worthwhile, that you are doing something, even if you're not sure what. You think about the physicians who came before you, the ones who trained you, who taught you to bleed and purge and apply leeches, the ones who wrote the manuals you've been reading tonight. They were trying, just like you're trying. They failed, just like you fail. And yet they kept going. They kept treating patients, kept writing down their observations, kept hoping that somehow, someday, their efforts would lead to something better. You are part of that continuity. You are one link in a very long chain of physicians stretching back centuries and forward into a future you'll never see. The physicians who come after you will know more than you do. They'll have better tools, better understanding, better treatments. But they'll still fail sometimes. They'll still watch patients die despite their best efforts. They'll still lie awake at night wondering if they did the right thing, because that's what medicine is. It's not certainty. It's not mastery. It's the ongoing attempt to help in the face of overwhelming complexity and uncertainty. And that attempt, that continuous effort across generations, is perhaps the only real progress there is. You find that thought comforting. You are not alone in your failures. You are part of something larger than yourself, something that transcends your individual inadequacy. You are trying. They tried. Others will try after you. And maybe, eventually, all that trying will add up to something. The candle is burning low now. You should go to bed. Tomorrow will bring more patients, more fevers, more wounds, more desperate families hoping you can save their loved ones. You'll do what you can. You'll bleed and poultice and prescribe. You'll sit with the dying and comfort the grieving. You'll try to help, knowing that your help is often insufficient. And that will have to be enough. Because you cannot cure death. You cannot cure suffering. You cannot cure the fundamental fragility of human bodies. All you can do is show up. Be present. Try. And sometimes, just sometimes, that trying will make a difference. Not always. Not even usually. But sometimes, and for now, in this moment, in this dark apothecary surrounded by inadequate remedies and uncertain knowledge, that's enough. You blow out the candle. The darkness is complete, but not frightening. It's the darkness of rest, of letting go, of accepting that you've done what you can for today. Tomorrow, you'll try again. Tonight, you sleep. Your breathing slows. Your mind, which has been churning through patience and procedures and ethical dilemmas, begins to quiet. You think, briefly, about Godfrey, his cough, his declining health, the fact that you cannot save him. You think about the merchant's children, their fever, their fear, the fact that they may or may not survive, and you won't know why either way. You think about Magda, her infected wound, her refusal of amputation, the fact that she's probably going to die, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then you stop thinking about them, not because you don't care, but because you cannot carry them with you into sleep. You cannot solve their problems in your dreams. You cannot cure them through worry. All you can do is rest, so that tomorrow you'll have the strength to try again. Your body relaxes into the mattress. The tension in your shoulders eases. Your jaw unclenches. Somewhere in the settlement, someone is probably dying right now. Someone is probably in pain, calling out for help that won't come in time. But you cannot help them tonight. You can only help the patients who come to you tomorrow. And to do that, you need to sleep. So you let go. You release the day's failures and uncertainties. You accept that you are human, limited, doing your best in a world that demands more than you can give. And in that acceptance, finally, you find peace. The last thought that crosses your mind before sleep takes you is this: you are a physician. You have been a physician for 30 years. You will be a physician tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until your body fails, or your mind breaks, or you simply cannot continue. And in all that time, you will never be certain that you're doing the right thing, but you will keep trying, because trying is what physicians do. It's what they've always done. It's all anyone has ever been able to do. And somehow, across centuries of trying, medicine has stumbled forward. Slowly, imperfectly, but forward. You are part of that stumbling progress. And that is enough. Sleep comes gently, like a tide rising. Your thoughts dissolve into dreams, fragmented images of patients and herbs and procedures, all blurring together into something that's no longer quite memory and not yet quite imagination. You dream of a patient whose fever breaks. You dream of a wound that heals cleanly. You dream of a birth where both mother and child survive. These dreams may or may not reflect reality, but they're comforting nonetheless. Because in dreams, at least, you can be the physician you wish you were, the one who always knows what to do, the one whose treatments always work, the one who saves everyone. In dreams, medicine is simple, certain, effective. In dreams, you are enough. And for now, in this moment of rest between one day's failures and tomorrow's attempts, that dream is all you need. The settlement sleeps around you. The sick sleep, their bodies fighting battles you cannot see. The healthy sleep, unaware of how fragile their health is. The dying sleep, perhaps for the last time. And you sleep among them. A physician who has done what he could, which was not enough, but was all he had to give. Tomorrow you will wake. You will gather your supplies. You will visit your patients. You will try to help. Some will improve. Some will worsen. Some will die. And you will continue, because that is what physicians do. But tonight, you rest. Tonight, you let go of the weight of responsibility and uncertainty and failure. Tonight, you are simply a person, sleeping in the darkness, dreaming of a world where healing is possible. And in the morning, you will wake and try to make that world real, one patient at a time, one treatment at a time, one small, uncertain attempt at a time, until finally, someday, someone figures out how to do it right. But that day is not today. Today, you sleep. And that is enough.